Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching KTN Prime, and tonight we're talking about human rights violations. We have Bob Njagi, the chairman of Free Kenya Movement, and of course also Simon Malenya, who is the technical lead advocacy for the Independent Medical Legal Unit. And before we took a break, we were looking at, Njagi's experience, mentioning some of the human rights defenders from across the region. Some of them have fled their countries, and like you say, Bob, you do not intend on running away because you desire to continue fighting for the rights of the people. But the question at this moment, and I'd like us to make some bit of understanding for the citizens and the audience that's watching right now, when we talk about human rights, what are we looking at, Simon, just to paint a picture on what we mean when we talk about human rights?
Basically, these are just the fundamental rights that every citizen enjoys just by being a human being. Just by being a human being, you enjoy these rights. For example, the right to life. You will have to enjoy it just by the fact that you're a human being. And some of them are not derogable. So it means that it cannot be taken away from you. So for instance, the right to life and the right to sanctity of life is guaranteed under the Constitution, for instance. So there is nobody who has got the right to take that life away from you. And as we have witnessed in this country, there are situations where people take other people's lives. And you have some sudden situations where that life actually is taken away by the same state that is supposed to protect it, using the police officers. And that is extremely unfortunate. People have got the freedom of assembly, the right to protest, the right to associate, and the right to the freedom of movement across the country, the right to live and own property everywhere in this country. Those are fundamental freedoms and rights that every Kenyan, for instance, enjoys, the very basic ones. You have got the right to food, for example. You have got the right to education and the right to good health care. Those are something that things that are supposed to be guaranteed by the state. So those basic fundamental rights cannot be taken away from any Kenyan who lives here, or any other person, human being who lives here in Kenya, rightfully and legally. So those are the basic fundamental rights.
When we look at the recent events, a post-mortem conducted has revealed recent post-mortem that Sherry Lathiambo, the Kenya Medical Training College student who was shot in Huruma, died of a single gunshot wound to the head. And when we look at such a story, the family is now demanding for justice. But when we want to look at justice, Bob, what are the channels that this kind of family would have to get, justice for the loved one who has lost their life?
Okay, at first I think the most important step is for them to have done the post-mortem to establish the cause of death, and that once it is clear that it is death by a bullet, then the next step is to indict the officers, and the officer starts with the officer in charge, the OCS of the particular police station, should be the first person to be held accountable, because that officer in charge is the one who supervises over that place. Secondly, we have independent commissions that are supposed to oversight the investigations over the police, the conduct of the police. And I'm talking about IPOA. IPOA has for so many years not been performing as it should. And it is not by, it's not because those employed do not have the capacity to do so, but they're not empowered to do so. The laws that mandate IPOA do not give them the powers to investigate or to prosecute. So all they can, they can investigate, but they cannot arrest, neither can they prosecute. So it falls short of the purpose and the meaning why they exist, because all they can do is to investigate, but they hand over the same files to the same prosecutor, who is a police officer, who is supposed to prosecute a fellow police officer. So you see the irony in it, because it is investigated by IPOA, and the file is handed over to the DPP, who is a police officer, and then it's a DPP who is supposed to prosecute the police officers. That's why you'll never find any cases going through court and active cases. So what are we doing about it? As the Free Kenya movement, we have a popular initiative, a referendum, where we are looking to restructure some of these independent commissions like IPOA, so that they can be given more teeth to bite, by giving them financial autonomy, and secondly, by giving them more functions of arrest and prosecutorial powers, so that once they investigate, then they can arrest and they can prosecute the said officers. Failure to do that, then we're just wasting time. IPOA becomes a tool for sanitizing rogue officers, because we report the cases, but no action is taken. So first we have to go through to investigate why is it that these officers are going scot-free. It is because the body that is in charge of that oversight is failing to undertake its duty. So I think that's an area we need to look at as Kenyans.
Simon, what do you think? Where are we missing the point as a country? Of course, Bob mentioning IPOA is supposed to be, carrying out investigations and ensuring that there is at least some headway in the prosecution of those who are found culpable of some of the deaths that we've witnessed in the country. But here we listen to Bob, and the idea here is if nothing is done, this is a situation that will remain persistent. What do you think can be done to adequately address this issue?
As I said earlier, the problem we have in the country is politicizing policing in the country, to the extent that the police officers are now used to manage political dissent, used to manage public order in spaces of politics. And secondly, we have gaps within the policing laws that exist today that are in reference to the Maraga recommendations of 2023 that needs to be reviewed. Remember, once that Maraga recommendations were released in early 2024, the Minister of Interior, through the CS then, who is the current Deputy President, gazetted the National Steering Committee to review those laws, including the law on public order management that the police uses, of course. We know that the Public Order Act that is currently in force was enacted in 1950 to manage Mau Mau and to manage colonial activism. That is the law that the police use up to date. It is unconstitutional in most instances. It goes against international human rights standards.
All right, I'll just interrupt you a bit, Simon. I'm told we have a bit of technical challenge, but we'll come back to you, Simon. Very good thoughts here you're giving. Bob, I'm almost asking this question because it feels like if then the government is not doing anything, the police are the ones who are handed back the cases, and yet, like you mentioned, many of these cases have just gone, no prosecutions, no justice, so to speak, is handed to the victims or their families. So what are we saying about the country? We've heard of enforced disappearances, extrajudicial executions, arbitrary arrests and detentions. Are we saying we are helpless as a citizen to address some of these cases that we're seeing?
Yeah, well, all sovereign power is vested in the people. So when the rubber meets the road, then the people can always revert to the constitution again through different means. You saw in Nigeria, we had one of the largest protests, the SARS, where it was the end police brutality. And I think where we're headed to is that you could see another round of uprise by the people now against the police brutality. And when that happens, you saw what happened in Mawego, where civilians went to a police station and touched it down. Why? Because they felt it is a source of insecurity to them, not a source of security, because that's where young people Ojwang was picked from, that police station, and he ended up dead. So we're looking at a situation that could end up into an uprising, to say the least, because when the people are pushed to the corner, then they have the right to come out and protest. So this may end up into more killings again, because when they come out to protest, they will meet the same police officers who will still lobby tear gas again. So it becomes a vicious cycle. And so at the end of it, who has to take the blame? Where does the buck stop? The buck stops with the president, the buck stops with the CS for Interior. And that's where we should point our fingers to. If the president cannot rein in on his cabinet secretary and his police, in fact, the president was the one saying, shoot the legs. Which kind of president can speak like that? Surely. Ati don't shoot the head, shoot the legs. That is insane because the order is coming from above. In that case, then the people can say, that's why the young people are saying Ruto must go. Because if it gets to a point whereby the executive is not willing to weigh down on the police, then the problem is with the executive. And as a people, the people can rise up and call for anti-government riots again. Yeah.
But if you're seeing enforced disappearances, and we are also hearing of arbitrary arrests and detentions, do you think it's possible for Kenyans to go to the streets, given the kind of intimidation that has been witnessed in the country, Simon?
Yes, it's a constitutional right guaranteed under Article 37 of the Constitution that the people have got the right to protest, to picket, and to present their issues or grievances to the authorities. It is their right that is guaranteed. And of course, if their fundamental and basic rights are still being trampled on, then they have that constitutional right to go to the streets and to demand sanity, as Bob puts it.
We can demand for the resignation of the CS, of Interior Security, Kipchumba Murkomen, for failing to protect the citizens. And if he doesn't resign, we can demand for the resignation of the president himself. And I think they're kind of teetering towards that direction.
That's correct. And as I was mentioning earlier, that this country is now ripe at least to review some of the policing laws. And we are glad that the government was positive from 2024 after the release of the Maraga Task Force report. It was positive in terms of reviewing some of the archaic clauses and provisions within these laws. But that steering committee was gazetted in August 2024. It was given a 9-month mandate, which lapsed without them doing anything. They extended for another 9 months, which ends in May. And as we speak today, there is no light at the end of the tunnel that we are going to have these laws and these policies being debated soon. So we urge that some of the provisions, archaic provisions that exist within these laws to be hastily reviewed. And of course, when they are being reviewed, they should involve the community members, the citizens themselves, to participate actively in ensuring that what their demands, what the constitutional tenets prefers, is what is contained in these laws, especially within the area of public order management. And I think this is the area that the police service has gone wrong in almost every aspect of it, the area of public order management. And this is an area that has produced a lot of mistrust between the police and the citizens. So if we can come together so that they see the human rights defenders, they see citizens as collaborators and not enemies, then we are able to actively and collaboratively review some of these aspects of the laws that are barbaric and they are constitutional.
I tend to ask this question for a Kenyan who's watching tonight, and we're listening to what you're saying, Bob and Simon. A question that really crosses my mind right now is, if I wanted to protect my rights as a Kenyan, what avenues do I have in protecting my rights?
Well,
we're talking about Gen Zs, because Gen Zs have been very vocal against some of the things they're not happy in terms of the governance of the day. So if they want to protect their rights, what avenues are available? Because if the government will not take action, if the president will not address some of the issues you're seeing in the country, we've just mentioned some of the cases of Sherry Lathiambo. Of course, we also, not too long ago, we saw the former deputy president and the case in Nyeri County. I mean, you could mention different cases. Of course, also Chantel Warogoro. You know, these are cases that are continually being reported in the country. So if the government doesn't do anything, what channels does someone have as a Kenyan in protecting their human rights?
First of all, I will say that we have constitutional oversight mechanisms that exist once rights are trampled on. And of course, the first one that comes to mind is the judiciary, the use of judiciary, so that you can present some of these cases to the judiciary for them to be able to decide on them and then grant specific orders that the Kenyans might need or might require. The unfortunate part, again, with the judicial orders is that there has been some levels of impunity where judicial orders are being ignored left, right, and center, especially by the government, entities. And we are talking about those cases that relate to human rights violations. So we have cases where judicial orders are being ignored, and that is unfortunate. The other one, of course, and is key, is that Kenyans have got their right, of course, to picket, to protest, to present grievances to the authorities, as guaranteed under the Constitution, Article 37. And that's an avenue that Kenyans can always use. And of course, the other one is that if it's political leadership that has a problem, then Kenyans have an avenue after every 5 years to make the right choices. But some of the fundamental rights that are being trampled on cannot always wait for the 5 years. Because what happens is you elect people, they come into power, they trample upon your rights for 2-3 years, then in the last year of elections become good, so that you vote them in again. So Kenyans have got an opportunity, of course, during elections to elect good leaders who will protect their rights, leaders who will represent them in the spaces like the parliament, leaders who will be able to air their grievances on their behalf. The unfortunate part is that we have a political class that is well separated from the common mwananchi, that they do not hear anything that common mwananchi says, other than at the time of elections, that they want to be elected, re-elected back to power. And that's the unfortunate part that we have.
But yet, even when we come to elections, there's always accusations, or rather allegations of rigging, perhaps a feeling that Kenyans, at this point, we saw some by-elections not too long ago, and the turn-up was very low in many of those constituencies. So to speak, speaking about the voter apathy in the country, perhaps Kenyans just tired. Is elections enough for us, using the election card, is that enough for us to address the human rights violations we have? Because as much as Kenyans will vote, perhaps the same leaders find themselves still in those positions somehow, some way. So what do we do as a country, Bob?
Our direction is through a popular initiative. That's the direction we're taking the country towards this year. We are in the process of collecting 1 million signatures from the registered voters across the country, so that we can have what we are calling a people's dialogue. All these issues we are canvassing on this show, from the state of security, issues to do with governance, issues to do with corruption, can all be canvassed through a popular initiative. And I think we are in that moment as a country where we need to reflect, because we have been very hard on the demonstrations. We have been demonstrating year in, year out, but the same system continues. So what we are saying now, we are moving from maandamano to majadiliano, people's dialogue. And our plea, even as I'm coming to this show, is that so that the viewers can look at our website, www.freekenya.co.ke, and sign the referendum, the petition. Once we have 1 million signatures, then we are going to have a convention that all stakeholders can take part in, from the civil society, the religious organizations, political parties, trade unions, lobbyists, can come together and we reason as a nation. Because when we dialogue together, we can find solutions to all of these things that
But do you think the president, his deputy, and his government is willing to dialogue?
It is not about willing. If we get 1 million signatures, the law states that the promoters of a referendum will deliver a petition to IBC together with the signatures. So it's not about willingness. It's about the willingness of Kenyans to come to this dialogue. Because if we do not do that, then I'm predicting a very difficult 2027. It is only through a referendum that we can sort out electoral injustice. You cannot reform independent commissions without using Article 257, a popular initiative. So we are already ahead of and trying to lead Kenyans to a direction that can resolve most of these issues before we get into the elections. And failure to do that, it means we are going into an election with a similar atmosphere and environment as we did in 2022. And the recipe is chaos. So I hope that at this moment, Kenyans can look at this as an opportunity for dialogue. And hopefully by end of March, if we can get the 1 million signatures, we are going to set a stage for that people's dialogue.
Simon, the future of this country seems like it's squarely in the hands of how perhaps the police agents in this country behave and how they handle the Kenyans. As you say, Bob, we talk about extrajudicial executions and forced disappearances. I mean, what right does the government have to carry out such activities in the country? Is there any basis strong enough to defend these kinds of actions, what we're seeing in the country, Simon?
Of course, there is none. There is none. And there have been various schools of thought. And of course, one of the biggest recommendations from the Maraga Task Force was the review of the curriculum of the police training. That curriculum was to be reviewed to include human rights concerns and human rights standards within the policing sector. Of course, there are other, we know as of now that there's within the National Police Service, there is a review of the curriculum that is underway. But what we need to see is a change of attitude within the policing sector. And secondly, what we need to do is a distinction between politics and policing. Because right now, the politics and policing are almost the same. They merge. So where the people in authority need to use the police to protect themselves, then they use the police against the citizens. And that is extremely unfortunate. So we need a review of the curriculum to inculcate human rights standards within the police. Number two, we are proposing that there must be continuous learning for the police officers. Every profession has it in this country. Every profession has it, continuous learning. But we have a police force or a police service where someone has graduated from a recruit school and 20 years later has never read something from any institution again. And that is unfortunate. So we need continuous learning systems within the police service to be able to inculcate the culture of adherence to human rights within the country. And of course, the fundamental one is that there must be a clear distinction between politics and policing.
Simon, if perhaps the efforts, I see Bob talking about signatures, talking about bringing dialogue amongst the Kenyans to address the issues we are seeing on human rights violations. Do you foresee a situation in the country where perhaps Kenyans, the citizens of this country would have to consider the UN Human Rights Council special procedures to address this issue? Simon.
Yes, and thank you for that. And of course we have, as institutions, especially the civil society institutions, we have been engaging the government through the Office of the Attorney General, the State Department for Justice and Constitutional Affairs and Human Rights, engaging in various regional and international human rights bodies, including the United Nations human rights mechanisms. If you remember very well, Kenya was reviewed by the United Nations Human Rights Council last year in May. And there are key elements of human rights violations that were articulated within the Universal Periodic Review in Geneva last year. Of course, there are aspects that the government has accepted, and there are aspects that the government is still not willing to accept to adhere to the human rights mechanisms. One of the things that the government has deliberately not done is to invite the human rights mechanisms like the special rapporteurs for torture, for example, special rapporteurs on freedom of assembly, special rapporteurs on extrajudicial killing, special rapporteur on enforced disappearance to come to Kenya for an official visit and to document some of these cases. The government has been very reluctant to support this mechanism and allow this special mechanism from the UN to come and review the human rights standards within the country. And that's a call that we have continued to do. One of the things that the government did accept in that periodic review is that they are going to officially invite these special mechanisms to come and document cases of human rights in the country. As we speak, it's almost 1 year later, nothing seems to be working around that particular area. So we are calling upon, of course, through the Office of the AG and the Minister of Foreign Affairs to hastily work on this concern and invite those special mechanisms for an official visit to the country.
Your final thoughts, Bob, as someone who's very vocal about the human rights protection in the country, what would you say in your final remarks?
I say that I think Kenya is the last line of defense in East Africa for human rights. We are the only kind of safe space remaining in this region. I want to thank the human rights defenders, the civil society in this country for standing up for the rights of Kenyans, especially for our case, myself and Nicholas Oyo, during our abductions. I also want to thank my Kenyans, especially young people who tweeted and texted about our abductions. I'm very grateful to the media for standing out boldly despite the threats from the state by exposing what the state is doing. I think generally if Kenyans stand together, we're going to overcome any kind of oppression that is leveled against us. I believe that we are in a moment of transition and a moment of change, hence the bloodshed and all that. But at the end of it all, there's light at the end of the tunnel. I believe that a new Kenya is coming. So let's just buckle up and gear up.
All right. Bob Njagi, Chairman of the Free Kenya Movement.
Yes.
Thank you so much for making time and sharing your story. It's very, very good to hear from you and just to see what you're doing for the country. And of course, also Simon Malenya, who is the technical lead for advocacy at the Independent Medical Legal Unit. Quite some interesting reflections there. Thank you for making time as well. Indeed, Bob, I love the fact that you're saying it looks a bit gloomy right now, but there is hope at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Thank you for making time. This has been a discussion on human rights violations in Kenya with my able panel. Like I've mentioned, my name is Leangare, and we have at least been able to unravel some of the key issues regarding human rights violations. Of course, this is some of the key discussions we continue to have to make sense for you right here on KTN. Thank you for watching and have a good night. God bless you.